Hi everybody, good morning. We're just waiting for just a few more participants to join the webinar. So please sit tight and we'll be back with you in a minute or two. Thank you. Okay, I think it's everybody online and active. So let's get started. So good morning everybody and welcome to this CyberLab webinar where we will discuss penetration testing and what organisations can do in order to stay protected in between those pen test engagements. My name is Ryan Bradbury, I'm CTO at CyberLab and I'm host of today's webinar. I've worked in the IT industry for just around 19 years in a variety of IT roles before founding and running a MSP for 6 years. And more recently, I've been heavily involved in cyber, which is how I found myself at CyberLab today. I'm joined today by my colleague Wayne Price. So Wayne, if I can just hand over to you to introduce yourself and maybe run through the CyberLab company history as well, please.
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Ryan. So good morning, everybody. As Ryan said, my name is Wayne Price. I'm Commercial Director at CyberLab. I've been in the sort of IT solutions delivery business for approximately 30 years, with the last 10 really specializing in cybersecurity and more specifically around helping organizations manage cyber risk and assurance by delivering quality pen test services. From a company perspective, CyberLab kind of formed around a year and a half ago. It took its current form from when 3 companies from the Chess Group really came together as one team. The first of those was Chess Cybersecurity, who are formerly Forcis, and they are experts in cyber sort of protection technology solutions from the likes of Sophos, Microsoft, Cisco, etc. And they provide a really good suite of managed service security solutions around those technologies as well. The second is Armadillo, who are a highly accredited CREST and NCSE check green light pen test company. And last but not least is CyberLab Consulting, who are an IASME accredited provider of cyber essentials and IASME assurance services, and also the team that developed a cybersecurity as a service delivery portal we call CyberLab Control, and some of that you'll see in action today. All 3 are now branded as CyberLab, and with the skill sets and the portfolio of services that we're able to deliver to clients, we can deliver our 3 pillars of detect, protect, and support.
Fantastic. Thank you, Wayne. So we just have a slide here, if it's a slide that will move on to it, just to sort of introduce and summarize the cyber attack landscape. So ransomware has been in the news for a number of years, which I'm sure you're all aware of. The stats on this slide really showcase that ransomware is not reducing, and in fact, the criminal gangs behind ransomware seem to be sort of earning more and more each year. So whilst that trend continues, the threat of ransomware is not likely to reduce anytime soon. I think additionally, with the rise of AI, the sort of attacks that we're seeing are likely to become more sophisticated, more targeted, and more effective, and ultimately more profitable for these criminal gangs. So what can we do as organizations in terms of reducing the risk of ransomware? It was announced earlier this year that the government are looking at ways of reducing the amount of money that is being paid out to ransomware gangs. What is being considered is making it illegal for a public sector body to make a ransomware payment. And in the private sector, I believe they're exploring ways in which they can make it law for a business or an organization to formally report when they have made a ransomware payment and the amount that was transferred. So with ransomware and the rise of AI on the cards, what actions should organizations take to protect their environments? So Wayne, as our sort of in-house expert on all aspects of penetration testing, maybe as a starter, if you could please explain to everyone, first of all, what is a penetration test and what a typical engagement looks like?
Sure, thanks, Ryan. So yeah, I think I recognise some of the sort of names on the call today. So some of you will be familiar with pen testing, some of you not so much. So really, there's kind of 7 steps to a successful sort of testing project. First one being kind of the initial client inquiry. The second one, and one of the most crucial ones, is the scoping element of an engagement. So quite often we will receive scoping documentation through from clients for us to review. More often than not, we'll hold what's called a scoping call or a scope meeting over Teams, for example. And really, the idea is to gather as much information as possible. So, we'll discuss the project and the reasons for carrying out the project in the first place. We'll identify kind of key security assurances that the client's looking for and testing objectives. And from gathering all this information together, we then create a detailed scope of work. That technical scope of work is then passed to a commercial proposal created. That's sent on with the scope to the client to review. There may be some tweaks needed along the way, but ultimately, hopefully, we get to a point where there's an acceptance of the scope and the commercials meet the client requirements. And at that point, typically the project is then handed over to our projects planning team. They'll arrange the scheduling, the planning of the project. They'll typically set up a live comms channel, which is really useful for kind of 2 main reasons. One, it gets all the main stakeholders from the client side, from our pen testing side, and if the testers have any questions or they get locked out of any systems or anything along those lines, we can get that remediated quickly and maximize the test time available. But more importantly, it's used to let the clients know if we have found any kind of medium and above issues whilst the engagement is going on, with the view that if the client's got resources on hand, they can potentially look at trying to remediate those issues. And this kind of can cut down on retesting time and retesting costs at a later date if we're able to do that within the test window. When it comes to the actual testing, our consultants will use various tools and their skills to probe, discover vulnerabilities, potentially link vulnerabilities together to gain access to systems and infrastructure and applications. And ultimately, the output from all of this testing is a pen test report. The reporting, hopefully, when you do receive a report, there should be no surprises because of that ongoing communication. But the report really is the key output, and this provides details of what's actually found in the test, and also provides help and guidance to enable clients to fix the vulnerabilities or holes that have been found, and hopefully that puts them in a good place, and therefore those holes and vulnerabilities can't be exploited by attackers for malicious purposes.
Great, thank you, Wayne. Very comprehensive answer. So in terms of why would an organisation require a pen test, could you maybe just comment on the most common reasons in terms of what customers are requesting in terms of the reasons why they're coming and asking your team for a pen test in the first place?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there tends to be kind of 3 main reasons for needing a pen test. One is for kind of compliance or accreditation purposes. So, for example, if you're going for ISO 27001 as an accreditation, then one of the stipulations within that is that you need to have carried out a pen test, ideally by a third-party organization. The other one that seems to be cropping up more and more is something where it's needed for supply chain purposes. So a supply chain agreement. I know we see these more and more often now, where we're becoming suppliers. You have multiple types of supplier onboarding forms, lots of information that you need to provide, and all of that is to sort of provide that supply chain with confidence that you are taking cybersecurity seriously. And usually one of the stipulations is, again, that you have pen testing done. And probably the last but not least is the need for IT directors and CISOs to be able to sleep at night. Ultimately, if you're not testing your environment, if you're not testing your cyber protection tools, how do you know they're working? How do you know you're secure?
Sure. So we have quite a complicated looking slide here, just in terms of the different types of pen test that exist. Could you maybe just walk us through these, Wayne, and just explain the most common types of pen tests that our pen test team are engaged with?
Yeah, absolutely. So usually it's kind of related to the main sort of areas where risk can come from. And the greatest risk is still the risk of connectivity to the internet. So we still see an awful lot of external infrastructure testing, where we're looking at the public IP addresses of that organization and what's on the end of those. So typically firewalls, routers, that type of technology. The second most common type is probably application testing. So this is testing both kind of standard static sites from an unauthenticated type perspective. And more often than not now, organizations have sometimes some quite very complex web applications, which are hosted obviously on the internet. And these provide portal capability where you might have clients logging on. And so we also test those applications from an authenticated perspective to make sure that there's the correct controls in place for kind of vertical and horizontal segregation of data. We also still carry out internal infrastructure tests, where we're looking at the segregation of networks and data within those networks, although that tends to be a little bit on decline as organizations have been moving to the cloud. So we've seen an increase in the requirement for cloud reviews. So we do carry out independent reviews of cloud infrastructures, AWS and Azure, and we test those from both a pen testing type perspective, where we're testing systems that are stood up in those cloud environments, but also from a configuration perspective to check that the correct controls are in place on the overall configuration of those cloud environments. One of the other areas, and one of the most exciting areas, are around scenario attack simulation, sometimes known as red team or purple team engagements. And these are where we're replicating kind of real world threats and attacks and the processes that would be taken by bad actors. And this really sort of tests not only the systems themselves for vulnerabilities, but tests the reaction of the IT teams, and tests also the defense tools that organizations have in place to protect themselves. These can be particularly useful in identifying the susceptibility, for example, to ransomware attack and that kind of thing.
That's great. Thank you, Wayne. Apologies, there was a housekeeping point. I only had one to run through at the start of the webinar, which I completely forgot. But if anybody has any questions as we're working through the webinar, there is a question mark icon in the top right-hand corner of the go-to screen. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them in there, and we'll cover off the questions at the end. So next slide, Wayne, is just to explain the limitations or potential limitations of a pen test, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest one really is cost. Obviously, a pen test is a manual process that's carried out by a very skilled consultant, and those guys aren't cheap. And so, yeah, it would be absolutely great if we could, pen test every week, or carry out a pen test of some description every day. But that's just not financially feasible. One of the other considerations is obviously, a pen test is just testing that environment at that particular point in time. And as you know, there tends to be updates to systems, applications, operating systems that happens all the time, and so a pen test today does not ensure that that same system is reliable in a week's time when there's been a patch applied that could open up an additional vulnerability. So if you're just testing on an annual basis, that's fantastic for a kind of deep dive on that environment, but it's not providing sort of updates on a regular basis in between that. And because of that, we've kind of identified this need for, wouldn't it be great if we could have some sort of, automated tools which can be kind of low cost but provide high value, that can run on a daily, weekly basis, and identify and notify of changes that have potentially created vulnerabilities. And that's really where our CyberLab control platform, and in particular the Threat Detect bundle, sort of comes into play.
Okay, yeah, that's great. Thank you, Wayne. So, as you mentioned, it isn't feasible or affordable to conduct a human-led pen test every week or even every month. And as a pen test is a sort of snapshot point in time assessment of that web application, that external infrastructure at that moment in time, we've been working on a new product within the CyberLab control portal that can hopefully counter some of those potential shortcomings with a human-led penetration test, and a product which can provide ongoing intelligence all year round in between those human-led engagements. So just to sort of run through the three constituent parts of our Threat Detect product bundle, the first tool within the arsenal is a dark web scanning tool. So we run automated scans every 24 hours, and we're looking for any breach data relating to any email address relating to a domain name or all domains for the customer's organization. So we send automated email alerts if a new breach is identified. Customers receive an email containing a hyperlink inviting them to access the control portal, view more information about the breach, remediation advice, and information in terms of what they can do as an organization to reduce the risk that this breach will or could potentially pose to their organization. Why is this important? This is important because approximately 28% of cyber incidents start from exposed credentials, and an awful lot of those are sold, traded, transferred, shared on the dark web. The second product within the tool is ReconScan. ReconScan is a set of intelligence tools that our pen testers actually use within the business. So when they're starting a pen test engagement, they often start a number of automated scans initially to provide more information on the customer's environment and potential weak entry points into the customer's estate, and where they should focus the human-led time for the engagement for the customer. So what we've done as part of ReconScan is we've taken those exact same tools, wrapped some automation around those, and integrated them into the portal. So again, we run regular automated scans, and we send automated emails to customers in terms of any security misconfigurations that we identify. All customers can access the portal, and they can view all of the internet-facing assets that our tools have discovered. So we will find subdomains, IP addresses, open ports, and sort of show a tree map indicating how all of those assets are interlinked, open ports, the tech stack running on all of those assets. And the third and final tool within the stack is a vulnerability scan tool. So this is powered by Tenable. So we use their API to allow customers to add custom scan targets themselves within the portal. We will also scan the same target that was referenced in the customer's pen test engagement. And using the Tenable API, we will scan all of those endpoints every 24 hours, and again, send automated emails if any new issues are identified relating to any of those scan targets. And again, the customers can access the metrics, the data, export reports anytime they wish from within our cloud control portal. So that is all of the three tools, or a fairly high level explanation of all of them. I'll just flick onto my other screen now and just very quickly just walk you through the portal and show you what that looks like. So just going to flick over to that screen now. Wayne, can you just confirm you can see that okay?
Yep.
Yep. So just as a quick summary here, so this is just a test fictitious company account within our control portal, and this customer is subscribed to Threat Detect. So the first product, as I mentioned, is the dark web tool. So we can just scroll down the page here. We can see a graphical overview at the top in terms of how many breaches we've identified and any breaches we've identified in the last 12 calendar months. Scrolling down the page, we can see information on all the breaches identified. We can filter by the breach type at the top. We can view more information about the breach, access remediation advice relating to that breach in terms of, as I mentioned, what organizations should do to reduce the impact and the risk associated with that. Towards the bottom of the page, if we scroll further down, we then can see all email addresses, individual email addresses, and any exposed passwords we are able to identify, which are available on the dark web in plain text. We mask out some other characters when we write them into our database, but what we are providing here, hopefully, is enough of a steer so customers can share this information with colleagues, and users will understand or hopefully realize if they're still using that same password for potentially other cloud services as well. The second tool, the vulnerability scan tool, so we allow customers to add scan targets themselves. We show a summary at the top in terms of all issues identified, a graphical overview as well, and for all scan targets added into the customer's account, we conduct automated scans every 24 hours, and the customer can click on any of these widgets and review the critical, high, medium, and low issues identified. We can view more information about a description of the issue, remediation advice, and where possible, we can access the raw scanner output from Tenable as well, just in which just confirms with some evidence in terms of exactly where that issue was identified within that target device. And the customer can share this data on Slack or Teams internally if they wish as well. And the third and final tool within the stack, as I mentioned, is Recon Scan. So we are running automated scans, sound like a broken record, and we are identifying every internet-facing asset relating to that customer's domain. So we will identify subdomains, where those assets are located around the globe. We can see the sorts of scans we're running here behind the scenes. We can identify IP addresses. This is a test domain, so we don't have an awful lot really going on here, but any open ports related to those IP addresses, we would identify the tech stack running on those assets that have been identified. And then we can work us across the tabs at the top in terms of just looking at exactly what subdomains were discovered, what changes have been identified since Recon Scan ran on the previous instance, URLs. We will conduct a vulnerability scan relating to those assets for every asset we identify, and we use AI here to fetch remediation advice specific to the issues that have been identified to allow customers with more information in terms of what they should do in terms of reducing the impact and remediating that particular issue and vulnerability. And then what quite a lot of customers quite like to see, especially on larger, more complicated domains, is a visualization tree here, if I can move it across the page, which basically shows our root domain, how the subdomains, IP addresses, tech stack, and all the vulnerabilities are interlinked with all the assets that we have identified. The customer can start a full scan, start just a vulnerability scan, and in the same as the other two services, export a PDF report anytime they wish as well. Last thing to mention before I jump back to the slide deck is we do have some other tools within the product as well. So we have what we call our full control suite, which then includes training and phishing simulation exercises, and we have wrapped automation around those tools as well, where we sync with the customer's 365 tenant, import the users, and automatically enroll all users in training phishing as well.
Ryan, just
so
quick. Sorry, Ryan, just to jump in quickly. I think the graphical display here has been really useful, and I think there's one sort of really good example I think that you had on that where it had helped a client.
Yes, thank you very much for that. I had forgotten that completely. But yeah, so to Wayne's point, we ran a couple of recon scans for an MSP partner for some of their end customers, and we had a catch-up call with the MSP after they had access to the app from these recon scans, and they confirmed that they were surprised by the output of the recon scan. Reason being was one of the customers in question, they had migrated them to Microsoft 365 about 18 months prior. And what they hadn't realized is the subdomain was still active, which had been pointing to their on-premise Exchange server. The subdomain was active, had an associated IP, but what Recon had discovered is there was a vulnerability associated with that open port and that Exchange server in their environment. So the MSP were not aware. I think they were maybe reliant on a third party, maybe a web agency who were in control of the domain to make that change, and hadn't realized the subdomain was still active. So hopefully it just highlights just one example of where an MSP or an internal IT team maybe are not in control of all aspects of a customer's environment. If there are third party in the mix, it's sometimes hard to see how all these assets are sort of interlinked and exactly what assets are exposed to the internet. Thank you for that, Wayne. I'll just jump back to the slide deck now. So Wayne, for a second, I'll hand back to you and cover off the all-important question on commercials and pricing, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for that, Ryan. So yeah, in terms of how we've kind of come up with the commercials, effectively we've got 3 basic packages, nice and easy, small, medium, large. The costs that you see on screen are monthly charges. We also do have annual packages available as well. And in terms of the difference between the 3 packages is basically the number of domain scan targets and the number of vulnerability scan targets. So small is 1 domain for dark web, 1 for recon, and 5 vulnerability scan targets. And then, as you can see, medium is doubling up on that, and large moves up to 3 domains and 20 scan targets in total. We also do have a custom option, so if your organization doesn't necessarily fit these particular packages, then we can work with you to come up with a sort of custom solution. Hopefully you'll agree, that the pricing, roughly works out at an entry level of less than a cost of a flat white coffee per day, which for the kind of protection that these 3 tools are providing, I think presents incredibly good value for money, but we'd really appreciate your sort of feedback in terms of what you think around that.
That's great. Thank you, Wayne. So that sort of concludes our slides for today. So we hope you have found that interesting and have a clearer picture perhaps in terms of what a pen test is, the purpose of a penetration test, potential limitations, and perhaps how our control portal can offer enhanced protection in between those human-led pen test engagements. We would love to offer anyone who's interested a free trial of the platform, so you can access your metrics and your data. We will send a follow-up email following the webinar later today with more information on how to request a trial for anyone who's interested. But I think for now it's just a time to see if there's any questions. So I'll just have a flick through and see if any questions have come in. So first question, Wayne, perhaps if you could cover this question off. It's just a question on threat detect and whether that replaces the need for penetration testing.
Good question. So the short answer is no, but it's a really good complementary service in addition to pen testing. So we'd recommend organizations carry out regular manual in-depth pen testing that will provide them with lots of really useful information and recommendations around any vulnerabilities that are found. But as we've already talked about, that's just a point in time. And so, run as many regular pen tests as your budget will allow. But in between that, you can utilize this sort of tool. Again, it won't give you the full depth information of a pen test. It will flag up some potential false positives. It's an automated system at the end of the day, and you have to do a bit of work to kind of to get further information about any vulnerabilities found. But used in conjunction with pen testing, I think that's kind of a perfect solution. You have your regular in-depth testing, and then in between that, you've got these tools that can identify potentially sort of low-hanging fruit, exactly the type of information that threat actors are going to be running on your environments to try and identify the same things. And so the two in combination, I think, work really well together.
Okay, thank you, Wayne. And we have one other question here. Would this product and would threat detect reduce cyber insurance premiums? So perhaps if I take that question. So I think the short answer to that question is it depends. We've heard an awful lot from the insurance industry recently in terms of insurers seem to be starting to push back an awful lot more on customers come renewal time or for organizations wanting to take out cyber insurance. And I think cyber insurers are doing an awful lot more to evaluate the risk that a new client would pose to their organization, their sort of insurance terms, and are requesting an awful lot more that organizations are able to evidence what proactive steps that they have been taking to manage their cybersecurity posture. So things like holding cyber essentials, having annual penetration tests, evidencing that they are routinely sending out security awareness training, phishing simulation campaigns. Insurers seem to be asking for evidence of an awful lot more of these activities now. So I think to answer the question in terms of would threat detect reduce insurance premiums, I think any additional proactive step that is being taken certainly is a plus point in the insurer's eyes. So it certainly wouldn't increase your insurance premiums, but I think in certain scenarios, perhaps with certain insurers, it may help and may reduce insurance premiums. But I think it really comes down to the specific insurer and the criteria and risk appetite for that particular insurer in question. It's a bit of a garbled response, but hopefully that answers the question. So that is actually all the questions we've had in. So I think all that's left to say is thank you very much for joining this morning's webinar. I hope you found that of interest. Wayne and myself are available on email and the phone if anybody has any questions or would like a deeper dive into the product. And we will send out an email later today just to sort of summarize the webinar and to send more information if anybody's interested in a free trial of the portal as well. Thank you for listening. Have a good day.
Thanks a lot.